Who is the girl in this rusty bed? Why am I back in a filthy room? Why is her voice ringing in my head? Why am I high on her cheap perfume? Vietnam.
Yo, hating on me cause I'm pretty as fuck. Hating on me cause I'm pretty as fuck. Hating on me cause I'm pretty as fuck.
Hi everyone, it's Pretty Baby. What? Elliot to sleep. Let's talk about TikTok. TikTok, like anywhere else on the internet, is a horrible place. Rehashed discourse is poorly articulated, art and ideas are appropriated, and everything can be sexualized. There's something uniquely gripping about TikTok though, where websites like Twitter and YouTube probably host an equal amount of toxicity, perhaps even more. TikTok feels younger and rawer. Filters and moderations are dropped, but faces are still prevalent. It's like watching everyone perform a extra desirable version of themselves. Social ills are extra visible on social media, and TikTok's attraction to exaggerated performance and irony make things even harder to stomach. Tweets and comments can definitely be infuriating, but nothing quite matches the sensory explosion of audio-visual content. A result of this is that harmful behaviors and ideas, which are not as easy to notice in society, become a lot easier to spot, and thus think about through TikTok. One such example is the apparently hot topic of Asian fetishization. Now, if you see a TikTok like that, you might not feel a disdain for it like many East Asian people might. After all, what's wrong with celebrating attractive people of color? No matter where you look on the internet, there are subgroups and content vehicles and popular posts in general that talk about how great and sexy X gender from X ethnic background are. Just Google hot boys with your racial or ethnic or national denomination and results will turn up. The thing is, those posts are usually supposed to come from people of the same background, thus uplifting their own communities. Whereas this page is run by a person or group that is from Western Asian countries, Iran and Afghanistan, made up of wholly different ethnic groups, and the content is entirely about East Asian men. Not just pretty boys, but K-pop, Asian boys are hot, K-pop. Seems a bit odd. This is the cultural context surrounding East Asian diaspora, which are often associated with the term Asian in North America, even though Asia is Earth's largest and most populous continent, which contains multitudes of ethnic groups even within East Asia itself, let alone other areas. While Asian fetishization as a general idea contains unified themes for people across Asia, it takes shape quite differently across these different ethnic groups in some ways. So today's conversation will mostly focus on East Asian people, particularly those of Japan, China, and Korea, though we'll be looking at Asian analysis, I guess, like overall Orientalist analysis as part of how we analyze this current situation. Really, racial fetishism exists for all races. Just as your ethnic group will be celebrated by its own people, it will also be obsessed over by outsiders. And the thing is, obsession isn't cute. It's not good attraction. It's harmful. But in a world that has historically seen Asian people as a commodity, it is the norm. And as we talk about movements like Stop Asian Hate, a response to visible violence and subjugation of mostly East Asian and Southeast Asian people globally within the context of COVID-19, we can't extract Asian fetishization as a separate issue from racism against Asians. They are a group deal. But the line between fetishization and admiration is not always clear. The roads Asian people take to define and empower themselves are muddled with exploitation. And a video like this will not solve issues, but if I can make it sound deep enough, it might help my career. So there you go. Let's go over some basic tenets of what we know about Asian fetishes as they relate to gender. Again, please note that these are mostly the discourses held about East Asian and Southeast Asian people, but there are a lot of factors in this that can be seen across Asian peoples, across the continent. First, gender is a social construct. It is a collection of words used to describe things that exist in nature, and a big-ass swath of ideas that societies have constructed around what those words assigned to those things should mean in order for society to live and succeed. Is that about right? Sorry, I'm an alien in an Asian person's body, so a lot of this is kind of just new to me, you know, I'm processing. Throughout the world, this construct propagates and navigates the ideology of the gender binary, with the binary being composed of men and women women, masculinity, and femininity. Each of these are assigned roles and standards which humans live their lives consistently and constantly pressurized by. When it comes to Asian fetishization, distinct differences exist in its relationship to each side of the gender binary. These can probably be best described via the stereotypes that persist about Asian men and women. Asian men in recent history have been seen as desexualized, weak, nerdy, unattractive. A sense of inferiority is cast upon them, correlated to their suggested lack of masculinity, or having a hyperfemininity. Hyperfemininity. A notable example of this dynamic exists in English-speaking gay communities. Asian men are often coveted and hypersexualized as ideal twinks, which often leads to predatory and dehumanizing behavior towards them. James Hahn Matson writes about his experiences with this for Esquire. A man came up to me, a white man, thrice my age. He said, "Let me guess, Chinese." My stomach dropped. "Well, you're not Vietnamese or Indonesian or Thai. You're too big. Japanese? No, too thick. Not Korean either because your face isn't... Mongolian?" I looked toward the bathroom, willing my friend to come back. "I'm right, aren't I?" the man said. "I'm Korean," I said. "No, you're not," he said. "Oh my God. But yeah, I see it now. God, I love Koreans. The food, the culture, amazing." On the other hand, Asian women are seen as docile and desirable, submissible and breedable, because they're women, right? Much of this hypersexualized, dejecting experience Asian gay men have is familial with the hypersexualized, dejecting experiences of Asian women under these stereotypes and ideas. The Instagram account The Fleshlight Chronicles, started by a young woman named Lillian, contains numerous screenshots she has received on dating apps paired with educational commentary on Asian fetishization. You may notice that the shared quality between these gendered stereotypes is the idea of hyperfemininity. Let me put my glasses on, because we're about to get fancy. These ideas of Asian people have roots in a confluence of political factors and social situations. In America, they link significantly with the country's history of Asian immigration from China, Japan, and Korea. From Asian American sexual politics from Rosalind S. Chow. The growing strength of the United States as a nation was dependent on the stolen land of indigenous people and the free and cheap labor of people of color. Asians fulfilled the same labor needs as Africans had on plantations. The interests of the white elites who ruled the nation were to continue to find cheap labor. Asian immigration was restricted because white ruling elites had no interest in having them become citizens. It was about capitalist exploitation that was racialized in nature. This led to the vast majority of Asian immigrants being men, which correlated with hypersexualized, fearful views of Asian people and reinforced for many the idea of the emasculated, impotent Asian male. In 1870, women made up 7.2% of Chinese immigrants. There was fear that Chinese prostitutes would bring in especially virulent strains of venereal diseases, introduce opium addiction, and entice young white boys to a life of sin. The Page Act was introduced to decrease the number of women because they were assumed to be these amoral, disease-carrying prostitutes. Once this law was enacted in 1875, the sex ratio became even more skewed, reaching its peak in 1890 at a rate of 27 men to 1 woman. There were similar trends in sex ratios for Asian Indian, Korean, Filipino, and Japanese Americans. Donald Golnick suggests that the targeted exclusion of Chinese women was a deliberate agenda by mainstream white culture to prevent any increase in the Chinese American population and to undermine the virility of Chinese and Chinese American men. The law was used as a mechanism to control the sexuality of Asian American men. Asian men were constructed as impotent and their women as whores. Controlling sexuality and creating controlling images of Asians in the United States reifies white supremacy, and these images become embedded into the white racial frame. These images are both racialized and gendered. Thus, hegemonic masculinity is also reinforced. The US government, namely the white actors who ran it, played a central role in creating an environment of state-controlled sexuality for Asian Americans. The laws determined with whom and if Asian American men could have heterosexual relationships. Anti-miscegenation laws made it impossible for Asian men to marry outside of their race. The restrictive labor market limited types of work available to Asian American men. Espiritu asserts, the racialized and gendered immigration policies and labor conditions also forced Asian men into feminized jobs, such as domestic service, laundry work, and food preparation. Chinese houseboys became symbols of the upper class in San Francisco. Asian men working in the domestic realm were also of Korean, Filipino, and Japanese descent. Asian men were constructed in the media as hypersexual and threatening to white women from 1850 to 1940. These dynamics affect the Asian American community structure and social perception to this day, but you'll notice that these ideas of Asians being hyper-feminine, hypersexual, and generally inferior are more or less reinforced by America's racist immigration laws and the dynamics that ensue, not originated in them. That's because ideas like this about the East are centuries old. With that, let's talk about imperialism. We cannot, if we would, play the part of China and be content to rot by inches in ignoble ease within our borders, taking no interest in what goes on beyond them, sunk in a scrambling commercialism, heedless of the higher life, the life of aspiration, of toil and risk, busying ourselves only with the wants of our bodies for the day, until suddenly we should find, beyond a shadow of a question, what China has already found. That in this world, the nation that has trained itself to a career of unwarlike and isolated ease is bound in the end to go down before other nations, which have not lost the manly and adventurous qualities. Theodore Joe Roosevelt, 1899. A bit of a sneaky reality of imperialism is that it's super gender coded, more than just an exercise of expanding power to exploit resources like cheap and enslaved labor or agriculture. It is a dick measuring tool, and dicks, allegedly, are male. The above quote from U.S. imperialist extraordinaire Teddy Roosevelt is one of a number of speeches in which the former president characterized imperialism as a manly duty. And he wasn't alone. Take the title of Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden and its closing stanza. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days. The lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise, comes now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Thanks, I'm a big fan of Eminem myself. Kipling calls on white peoples, but not incidentally white males, to search their manhood through the thankless years, to imperialize other countries for their sake, even if it's such a thankless task. Because at the end of it all your fellow strong white men will head nod at you approvingly as you all drink beer atop a bed of Asian bodies. In order for Europe and later the United States to conquer the rest of the world, they first needed to construct the idea of a rest of the world. Their idea of the Orient or the East was one held in European cultural bias as an other for thousands of years. This kind of othering is not merely one of distinguishing the self from those who are not the self, but of creating the subaltern or the social groups and individuals whose historical activity is repressed, neglected, misinterpreted, or at the margins of hegemonic histories, discourses, and social formations, as written by Pier Marco Piu of Antonio Gramsci's Coinage. Names. The East, or the Orient, is thus a shifting idea of an other that can be defined by the traits observed and chronicled by the Self, the West, the Occident. And of course, that has to be the case because the Occident, the West, we are the only ones who really understand what's going on. The East could never possibly understand themselves. Those aforementioned traits include primitiveness, barbarism, despotism, fanaticism, savagery, and of course, with this barbaric quality, there is also a barbaric sexuality. Sunny Wan's paper, White Sexual Imperialism, A Theory of Asian Feminist Jurisprudence, examines the realities of Asian women being sexually exploited as a mindful byproduct of colonization and war. At one point, Wan writes of Edward Said's book Orientalism, noting his observation that for the West and the Orientalist, the Orient represents an effeminate sexual being. In the late 1970s, Edward Said described Orientalism as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. He noted the confluence of Orientalism and sexism. Orientalism views itself and its subject matter with sexist blinders. The local women are usually the creatures of a male power fantasy. They express unlimited sensuality, they are more or less stupid, and above all, they are willing. Moreover, when women's sexuality is surrendered, the nation is more or less conquered. Thus, the sexual conquest of Asia's women correlates with the conquest of Asia itself. Said's reflections are based on his observations of authors like Gustave Flaubert, who wrote of Asian people as grotesquely sexual and incredibly biased and politically exploitative travels to Asian countries. Flaubert's accounts of the famed beauty Küçük Hanım stand out in this regard, and Said himself says as much in the introduction of Orientalism. There is very little consent to be found, and the fact that Flaubert's encounter with an Egyptian courtesan produced a widely influential model of the Oriental woman. She never spoke of herself, she never represented her emotions, presence, or history. He spoke for and represented her. He was foreign, comparatively wealthy, male, and these were historical facts of domination that allowed him to not only possess Küçük Hanım physically, but to speak for her and tell his readers in what way she was typically Oriental. My argument is that Flaubert's situation of strength in relation to Küçük Hanım was not an isolated instance. It fairly stands for the pattern of relative strength between East and West, and the discourse about the Orient that it enabled. Flaubert's accounts of Hanım's apparent sexual partner in Egypt are horrible. Said writes, "What he especially liked about her was that she seemed to place no demands on him, while the nauseating odor of her bedbugs mingled enchantingly with the scent of her skin, which was dripping with sandalwood." After his voyage, he had written Louise Colette reassuringly that the Oriental woman is no more than a machine. She makes no distinction between one man and another man. Woven through all of Flaubert's Oriental experiences, exciting or disappointing, is an almost uniform association between the Orient and sex. In making this association, Flaubert was neither the first nor the most exaggerated instance of a remarkably persistent motif in Western attitudes to the Orient. The motif persists. A GQ article entitled Oriental Girls, the Ultimate Accessory from, and I kid you not, the year 1990, reads as follows. "When you get home from another hard day on the planet, she comes into existence, removes your clothes, bathes you, and walks naked on your back to relax you. She's fun, you see, and so uncomplicated. She doesn't go to assertiveness training classes, insist on being treated like a person, fret about career moves, wield her orgasm as a non-negotiable demand. She's there when you need shore leave from those angry feminist seas. She's a handy victim of love or a symbol of the rape of third world nations, a real trooper." Okay, let's take a break for a second. That has to be fake, right? Like, either this article is ironic or made up entirely. I can't fathom this writer, whose name is apparently Tony Rivers. I can't find any info on anyone with that name as a writer other than an obscure English singer who I doubt is the person. But if this article does exist, it's apparently from October 1990, and this is the cover. This piece, which I guess is real, serves as an anecdote to underscore very real attitudes towards Asian women, particularly manifesting overseas in the US's wars in the Philippines, Vietnam, and others. Of American occupation in the former, Warren writes the following. "While occupying the islands, the American soldiers referred to the Filipinas as little brown fucking machines powered by rice. A sex industry sprang up to cater the US military men, offering a girl for the price of a burger. It was the imperialistic conquest of the islands by the Americans that jump-started the sex entertainment industry in the Philippines. During the Vietnam War, 5 U.S. military bases stationed in Thailand sheltered 40,000 to 50,000 American GIs at any given time. These are the roots of Asian fetishization. It is a sexual exploration conveniently rationalized by pre-existing characterizations of anything and most everyone east of the Turkish Straits as being naive, uncivilized, and dirty. Dirty isn't a euphemism for sexual vulgarity in the English language for no reason. Where there is an idea of barbarity, there is an idea of perversion. Talking dirty and doing the nasty are characterized this way because they are interlinked with fun forays into uncivilized, filthy behavior. So anything uncivilized can be correlated with sexuality in this uncivilizedness. And where Asia can be construed as filled with uncivilized people, it becomes not only the duty of the civilized man to liberate those poor backward people, but also the occasional pastime of this man to partake in the nasty backwards behavior of the uncivilized for a unique bit of fun and freedom that you just can't get at home. When he buttons his coat and walks back into his office, he may even begin to feel a bit of solidarity for the savages. Maybe our buttoned-up civilized world is a bit too forward, too civilized, and maybe there's something quite forward-thinking after all about those heavy spices, those colorful rugs, that smelly little lady I hooked up with at that shack, and that strange little dance she did. Meanwhile, that little lady, that Kuchuk Hanum, has an actual proper name, has a home and a job, and maybe that job is to dance for and even sleep with the white visitors willing to pay, but she doesn't do such a thing because she's inferior to anyone. Let's talk about economic incentive before we go. TikTok, as we discussed in the intro, is full of Asian fetishization, right? Well, how do we characterize this? We see it in, for example, the many femme-coded people, usually women, using words and signifiers from East Asian cultural products that are connoted with horniness, but also generally weakness, smallness, and nastiness. The sexuality of the Asian schoolgirl is based greatly in the power dynamic at play. The straight male attracted to her is signified by her school uniform and smallness, to see her as naive, not yet civilized, not yet independent and striving for agency. Ugh. As the allegedly existent writer Tony Rivers would allegedly say in an alleged GQ article from decades ago, she's fun and uncomplicated. And yes, there's most definitely an age dynamic present here. The thing is, you'll notice that TikTok's Asian fetishization will still very much feature Asian people. We Asian folks will do it to ourselves, happily. Hashtags for Asian boys and Asian girls are filled with folks showing themselves as attractive through their slim figures or their young-looking faces, their makeup, the same tropes. We ate up the Gambare Senpai trend, and most of us weren't even Japanese. It's here where we begin to acknowledge the complexity of the cultural situation Asians find themselves in globally. On one hand, it can be very fashionable to reprimand Asian people for performing these things. Some people want to rip that Orihime cosplay right out of that Filipina girl's closet and tell her that she should stop catering to the white gays because she's better than that. She should love herself. And there are constant political movements in East Asian countries centered on reprimanding those damn soy boys that keep showing up on our airwaves with long hair and eyeshadow. China's apparently cracking down on effeminate men appearing on TV. Japan's been through the whole Soshokuke Danshi conversation at least 100 times in the past 20 years. And South Korea just elected its very own incel king to the presidency. And therein lies the problem. It bears similarities to the third wave feminism problem. Why should I be forced to throw away my makeup and cut my hair if I don't want to? Can't I like the way conventional attractiveness feels and still have my criticisms of it, still be a feminist? Can't I be an anti-Orientalist and also swoon over modatsushi? After all, just because Flaubert saw the liberating aspects of Oriental cultures in a way that was entirely racist doesn't mean there aren't liberating aspects of the things people see as backward about us. Now, for example, there's definitely something Eurocentric about the way people hail Yuzuru Hanyu. Michael Jordan had immense body control to kiss 360 layups off the glass and nail fadeaway jumpers, but that's basketball, so that's dominance, power, and athleticism. Meanwhile, Yuzuru shows insane athleticism and body control to nail double axels, but all his fans, detractors, and biographers can speak on is how graceful and beautiful his work is. And since those qualities are hailed in figure skating, a feminine-coded sport, Yuzuru and other Asian male athletes are celebrated center stage a little easier. And yeah, many of those fans that flock to Yuzuru and flock to Shoma and Yuma are probably doing so with some Orientalist vibes. Not all, but maybe some of them. They may be infantilizing and sexualizing these men in the same way Flaubert infantilized and sexualized Kuchikhanum, branding themselves fans but still seeing these Asians as in need of your civilization, your interpretations, seeing them as disposable, admirable only in the cultural stereotypes they embody that you think are swell, and if not, maybe they're special because they embody those stereotypes in a way that's just perfect for you, or they approach the stereotypes that they're not supposed to approach, the Eurocentric ones. In the same vein, many of those Yuzuru fans are also fans of K-pop and anime and donghua, in which case an Asian person like me might wonder, hey, you seem to be really into pretty Asian boys. Are you racist by any chance? A similar idea to that was posited in a tweet earlier this year. The thing though is that tweet engendered a lot of angry responses, and they came not really from obvious fetishizers mad at being called out, but more from people who are fans of some or all of these Asian people and media, counter-arguing that this blanket accusation in and of itself that they're all fetishizers is racist. Even if you make these accusations while allowing for exceptions, your point stands in that it basically invalidates seeing Asian people and media the same way people see media and people from the West. If you think any non-Asian who's a fan of a lot of Asian shit must be doing so because they see Asians as commodities, because they fetishize Asian people, you're basically saying that non-Asian people can't be genuine fans of Asian people, that anyone who loves us must be questioned as suspicious. And here lies the Asian brain. Note that part here in the back, the hanplex. It's a Korean term. This is the part in the Asian that constantly asks itself, can I be loved? Elliot makes videos and music online. Elliot is a vaguely public figure, and he's made numerous online friends and followers. At first, he felt a lot more confident in doing that. He knew he was Asian, obviously, though he's biracial as well. But he didn't think other people saw his Asianness as a defining character trait. I mean, he did, but that part of his brain, the hanplex, wasn't as big, it wasn't as strong. And then time passed and he began to realize, oh my god, a lot of people see his Asianness as a defining character trait. You don't learn this through big reveals, through someone calling you a chink or something. It's more like, this is Elliot's thoughts. Every time I take up a little more space than it seems I should, some people react negatively. Now that's a part of life most anyone can relate to. But it's the way that people react negatively that is a bit different when you're Asian. To me, and again, I'm speaking as Elliot here, it feels like some people I'd come across loved to remind me that I was cute over and over again, even when it wasn't necessary, which is, it's cool to be called cute, but some people loved when I agreed with them, even when I was boisterous and vulgar about it. But certain people didn't like when I wasn't playing the role they wanted me to. When I disagreed with them, or when I bothered them in some way, a pattern arose. Now, instead of being yelled at, lashed out at, conversed with, whatever, it seemed like numerous people thought instead that the best way to get me to stop was to lecture me. I'm smart, they'd say. I usually get it. I'm usually so nice. So for me to be mean or ignorant in this way, well, that's probably not my intention. I'm cute. I'm smart. I'm a good boy. So here's a few paragraphs explaining what I clearly just didn't get. Hopefully when this is cleared up, we can all go back to our fun little routine and I'll go back to being a good boy. First of all, speaking as Elliot here, just like what he would say. If you have an issue with me, act like I'm a human being. If we're friends, talk to me about it like a friend. If we're strangers, either write a good critique of me or suck that shit up. Do not ever talk to me like I am your special boy. I am a grown man with a baby face and a whiny voice. Second, when you notice this behavior from non-Asian people, especially white people, paired with the occasional appearance of comments fetishizing me or racially insulting me from different people, randos on the internet or whatever, or crucially, other Asian people being treated that way. When you see that, you begin to create a filtering mechanism. Sooner or later, your whole relationship with people's affections and respect is messed up. Cause I don't know if you actually like me or if I'm just a novelty to you. Ugh, Elliot's gonna love how I'm performing his feelings and thoughts. I should get an award for it, to be honest. But ultimately, there's nothing wrong with people calling Elliot cute or smart. His baggage with people's ideas of him is his baggage, and he needs to know how to deal with it, or risk alienating people that actually like him and want to support him, or people that want to inhabit his body for world domination. Just because all of that racist ideology is around doesn't mean he should center his life on it, or that he should fixate on the Western gaze. As Asian people, and aliens inhabiting Asian people, we have our privileges and our pains. We'd love it if people stopped Asian hate, but they won't. It is embedded in our society. It is a jail that everyone lives in, and the only way forward is liberation. In the meantime, we've got to acknowledge the situation and make the best of it. We've got to take the good with the bad. When it comes to being Asian and performing for a non-Asian audience, we're often going to do things that make us fear we're orientalizing ourselves. Frankly, we're going to orientalize ourselves. The story of K-pop and anime is not just one of Asian liberation. These companies proliferate Orientalist ideas in their works to profit off of that Western gaze. That's why K-pop girls are presented as they are. But K-pop girls don't all hate being K-pop girls. Many of them find a way to turn it into a fun, liberating, and profitable experience, especially once they graduate from the exploitative K-pop system and move on into other exploitative systems. I love this world. So when it comes to what people think of your presentation of yourself, your words, your actions, the crucial question is this. Right now, is this what you want to do? Or is this what you feel you have to do? This is what I want to do.
Go up, pretty baby, go up, pretty baby, go up, make me glow up, pretty baby, glow up, pretty baby, glow up. I don't know much.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe, turn on the notification button. Also consider subscribing to our Baby Gang Patreon to help me and my group of friends / artists create videos, art, and community. Thanks to Stephanie, Dia, Yuri, Danae, Harini, Uma, Sieb, the Baby Gang Discord server, which is linked in the description for those who want to join. Please be nice. And everyone else who helped with making this video. Bye!